Let's get straight to the point. Today we're going to unpack the difference between capitalism, socialism, and communism, not through ideology or internet memes, but from the original theoretical framework proposed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. We will explain how these systems were supposed to evolve according to Marx's logic, what categories for analysis or of analysis he introduced that are still used in the social sciences, and why the historical application of these ideas diverged so radically from the theory. We will close with a comparison that might surprise you: Marx versus Thomas More, two thinkers, two utopias, and very different intentions. What did Marx and Engels actually propose? Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels weren't just critics of capitalism, they were theorists who sought to understand and explain its internal logic. In their view, history wasn't driven by ideas, but by material conflict, above all, conflict between classes. They proposed a historical sequence that would unfold in stages: capitalism, socialism, and communism. Each system would emerge from the contradictions of the one before it. This wasn't just a political hope. They presented it as a structural law of history. Many of Marx's forecasts didn't hold up, but his intellectual legacy persists, especially in the categories of analysis that still inform sociology, political economy, anthropology, and cultural studies. Let's go through them one by one. What is capitalism according to Marx? Under capitalism, the means of production, factories, land, capital, infrastructure, are privately owned. The vast majority of people do not own them. Instead, they sell their labor power to survive. This creates two central classes: the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, and the proletariat, who only own their labor. Here, Marx introduces one of his most influential ideas: surplus value, the value that workers produce but don't receive in wages. That difference becomes profit for the capitalist. What is socialism? Why is it a transitional phase? For Marx, socialism isn't the end goal. It's the transitional stage between capitalism and communism. It's the system that should emerge when the working class takes control of the state and restructures the economy. Under socialism, the means of production are no longer private but collectively owned. The economy is managed by the state, ideally on behalf of the workers. The aim is to eliminate class distinctions and prepare the ground for a stateless society. In this phase, Marx proposed the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, not as a repressive regime, but as a temporary political regime in which the working class suppresses the old ruling class and reorganizes production. Some modern interpretations of socialism, like those of Richard Wolff, focuses less on state control and more on democratizing the workplace, where workers make decisions collectively about what to produce and how to distribute it. So now, what is communism? Communism is the final stage. In Marx theory, it's the result of a long process of transformation, not a sudden revolution. At this point, society has abolished class divisions, eliminated private ownership of the means of production, and rendered the state obsolete. In a communist society, there are no classes, no state, no private property, no money. Instead, people contribute to society based on their own abilities and receive based on their needs. That's the core of the famous principle.
From each according to his ability, to each according to his need.
Work in this vision is not forced or commodified, it's fulfilling and communal, but Marx never detailed what this society would look like. It remained a horizon, a theoretical destination, not a roadmap. What happened in practice? When countries tried to implement Marxist theory like the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, and North Korea, the results were far from what Marx imagined. Instead of transitioning toward communism, the state became more powerful, not less. A new elite class emerged, party officials and bureaucrats. Democratic control over production was rarely, if ever, realized. Rather than dissolving the state, these regimes entrenched it, and instead of empowering workers, they substituted one form of centralization for another. So the question remains, was the failure due to a flawed theory, or was the theory simply never applied as intended? Let's compare Marx's vision to that of Thomas More, who wrote Utopia in 1516. More imagined as a society without private property, with shared labor and comparative life, but he knew it was a fiction, a thought experiment, a critique of his own time. Marx, on the other hand, believed that history would naturally arrive at his utopia through struggle and structural transformation. That's the key difference. More offered a satirical provocation, while Marx proposed a historical certainty. And that certainty is what many scholars today question. So, what do we keep from Marx? We might not follow him to the end of his sequence, but many of his analytical tools remain incredibly useful. Class struggle, surplus value, alienation, reification, the idea that economics shapes culture, politics, and ideology. Even if communism never arrived, Marx's way of asking questions about power, labor, and ownership still frames much of how we study inequality today. Understanding Marx doesn't require agreeing with him. It requires listening, interpreting, and knowing where theory ends and where history begins. I'm Gus Pérez. This is The Machine State.